Greetings, friends. So, we are here to talk about a little Doom set that was released in 1997. Originally, actually released in 1996. There were several different versions, known as Eternal Doom. And Eternal Doom, I felt like it was really important to come back to Eternal Doom for various reasons, but I'll put that aside for a second. So this map is probably the most well-known, well-regarded, if not at least one of the most well-known maps from Eternal Doom, and it's called Darkdome by Sverre Kvernmo, who also did a map that I looked at in my earlier Doom Mixtape videos called Teeth.wad or Express Elevator to Hell. So he was known for making maps. God, there is so much to go over here in this video, but we have time. He was known for making some maps in the master levels, which the Express Elevator to Hell is one of them, and his style is kind of more unusual. I think he has more of like a kind of like an artistic sensibility, I guess you could say. But so flashback to the 90s, and a lot of there were several. So Doom was incredibly popular, of course, and Doom modding became more and more popular. Of course, this was all through services like CompuServe, or this was even in like the pre-AOL days. So there a lot of stuff that people uploaded, and around that point is when the id Games archive was created. Of course, a lot of stuff is still missing from that point, but around that point, a lot of commercially released sets came out, such as Final Doom, which is that's the most well known. It's by Team TNT, and Dario and Milo Casali did Plutonian. Team TNT did the TNT set, and there was other stuff that's lesser known, like Perdition's Gate. There was not stuff that was not permitted to really be released, but was released anyway, like Maximum Doom. There were a bunch of Doom compilations, and there was other stuff like this game called HackX, HACX, which was from people from the Doom modding community, but a very and it was intended as a commercial project, but it was very ill-fated. So this is around the time where we're in the waning years, around 1995, 96. 96 especially, commercially released Doom mods have stopped really being a thing. And, I'm sure by the time that they started working on Eternal Doom, so Eternal Doom was originally worked on by a team called Team Eternal, and then it was like partially subsumed into Team TNT, which of course made the TMT set. But most of the members are from this Team Eternal, one of which is Sverre Kvernmo. And he made 3 maps for this set, and this is the last one, this is the last one from the final release of Eternal Doom. So Sfera was, big to defining the earlier levels of Eternal Doom. He did 3 maps, and this is probably the one that kind of hints into like the direction that Eternal Doom fully goes into. I also think his map 4, which is called Nucleus, which is kind of more of like a warehouse crate maze type setting, is really interesting. Maybe even more kind of strange than this map in some ways, but not as like, elegant or whatever you want to say. So he was also the artist for this project. And I'm just going to say, so Eternal Doom basically was indicative of a certain sensibility towards maximalism. So within the original engine, like Doom engine constraints, there was a limited amount of what you could do, and that would change very quickly after Eternal Doom came out with the Boom engine, which Team TNT and Jim Flynn and some people who contributed to this project were responsible for, which removed a lot of limits. But up until that point, they had to face these vanilla limitations, and a lot of I think a lot of the feeling of these maps are defined by that. So they're trying to squeeze the most out of very limited means that were available in, 1996 when this map was made, potentially even 1995. So this map, I should say, is probably the most well-regarded map of the entire set. It was voted number 9 on the top 10 most 100 most memorable maps on Doom World very recently. And by far the highest ranked one from Eternal Doom, maybe the only level from Eternal Doom. I think there's one more also by Sverre Kvernmo. And of course he came back. So Sfera ended up, apparently, according to this thread, he was originally supposed to be a level designer on the Duke Nukem 3D team, but because this was still the era where you could get hired from doing these maps, so I think some of the ambition and some of the desire towards pushing the limits and going beyond Doom, hence kind of the name Eternal Doom. I think they're trying to make something that was going to be, more long-lasting and just like blow past the limits of what you thought Doom was. So he was originally supposed to work on the Duke Nukem 3D team, but because of visa issues, he wasn't able to. He was finally hired to work on a game called Redneck Rampage, was a mapper on that, and most well-known, kind of quite oddly, because I remember this game from PC Gamer, for being the lead designer on the game Kiss Psycho Circus, The Nightmare Child, a perhaps little remembered but very interesting remnant of the year 2000, also a first-person shooter. And more recently, he's gone back to Doom modding. He made a map called Plasma Plant. He had an entire set called Echelon, but that's another whole thing. So he did most of the textures in this game, and I first discovered Eternal Doom probably, I don't know, like 1999, 2000, 2001, only a few years after it came out. And by that point, boom mapping was a thing that you could do, and Z-Doom had begun to be a thing. But people were still making maps within the vanilla limitations. Sets like Scythe or Alien Vendetta, which came out in the 2000s, still used vanilla limitations. That said, I wish I could say that these textures were impressive for the time, but at least in 2000, I didn't like these textures, and I still don't really, with the exception of a few textures. I think they're a bit... Basically, overall, I would say Eternal Doom, in its attempt to be this maximalist thing, that was going to be, that was going to potentially get jobs in the game industry for people who worked on it. And in the case of Sfera, it did, at least temporarily, for a little bit. I don't think he works in the game industry anymore. And I think, the problem of trying to do this maximalist thing within a minimal sort of setup is they sort of had to go broad strokes, and a lot of the levels are big, but not necessarily as detailed or interesting as you would want or expect from modern maps, because there's only a limited amount of what you could do. So in that intro area, outside the castle, there's 2 giant tall torches, and apparently they were there just to prevent the map from doing a viz plane overflow, which means there's too many things in your view at a time, and it would just cause the game to crash. And this map, according to Sfera, from when Eternal Doom was played by the Doom Megawad Club in 2016, was apparently he spent an entire year on this map. So this map was something that I can imagine just being pieced together and refined. And I think the most interesting thing about this map, it's sort of like a monastery or a cathedral or something. The most interesting thing is this has what I call, and I'm sure many people have a difference different views of, different names for this, but I call it like architectural integrity, which is like the entire map looks like a cathedral. It's built like a cathedral, and all the areas and stuff that you go into, even though they're kind of puzzly and definitely Doom-like, feel realistically designed in that sort of like the map and setup. And the broad strokes, even though I don't really like the textures for Eternal Doom for the most part, I have to say, like, I bounced off this set. I also don't like the custom sounds. I don't know why the imps were recolored. There's a lot of things that feel very strange to me in the context that maybe were cool in like 1996, but to me now I think just are stupid. But there was that kind of like maximalist machismo thing going on with, the way that these sets were constructed, and the fact that you were much more of a big shot doing this stuff than you will ever be now, because the audience for Doom maps, there's still a decent audience for Doom maps, but it's more niche and it more has particular values. And if you want to, be super cool and do something else, then you do something else now. It's not, you don't prove yourself through level design. I think at the end of the day, Eternal Doom is kind of a dated experience, and it's certainly not the maximalist wonder that many people at the time, perhaps, and maybe the creators thought it was. But there's stuff like this cathedral, which is really cool. Even today, I think this cathedral is really cool. I mean, of course, the limits define, the limits of the vanilla engine define everything of what was capable. But I think the most interesting part about it to me is that in modern maps, they will rely so much, a lot of modern mappers will rely a lot on detail to convey sort of something impressive about a setting. And they don't have that to work with at all in Eternal Doom. It has to be broad strokes. And in the case of this map, just the construction and architecture are really what's impressive, because it's working with such minimal tools. And I do think it's more impressive than a lot of what has come after, just because of that. And also the lighting effects really help and make it work. That said, there are plenty of things that I don't like as much about Eternal Doom. I think more so than anything. So the overwhelming perception of Eternal Doom, there's people who certainly like it, and then there's a lot of people who criticize it for being confusing, for being a switch hunt, and all that kind of stuff. And I do think that's undisputably true. I do think some of it is a result of just trying to sandwich as much in as they can within the limits of the vanilla Doom engine, which maybe isn't always the best impulse. Maybe you should cut some things even if you're trying to be impressive. But again, this is an era where maybe a lot of things felt like they were at stake, and you really wanted to prove yourself as a mapper and sort of be that little bit higher level above somebody else. And this is really one of those kinds of maps. The author spent an entire year on it. But I think if it were just a matter of it having confusing progression or something, then I could maybe defend it or like it more. But I really think this is an incredibly 90s experience through and through. And it is dated, but it's also incredibly interesting and unique in places. And, this map is one of the easily best examples of that. Probably the most well-remembered example, because of areas like this, which again, are kind of hard to... It's hard to recreate. And even the author himself said that he feels even though the bar has been raised a lot in terms of the detail and stuff that people expect or that will wow people, the architecture in this, I think, is almost more interesting because it has integrity to it. And I think this is generally an appropriately sized map. although I think some of the switch hunting things, I'm not convinced about the limitations being the real reason. I think there's just a general different idea of what game design is in the 90s, and it's still in the era when people are more inclined to do confusing things and not convey things as clearly. Of course, like, this is also before, like, slaughter maps and stuff. So I guess people have different ideas. There's different sort of ideas of what is fair and what you should do. And I think it depends very much on the author in this particular set. But to go all the way back, like, the real reason I like this room, by the way, this is like an example of something very simple architecturally. Like, there's arches. You don't notice the arches, even though that's like, you can't do arches in Doom. That's just a texture. You don't notice it so much because of the lighting, and none of that stuff like stands out as cheesy in this map as it might in other maps. But, you know, even at the time, I felt like this set was a little bit cheesy because of it going for this, like, maximalism. But also, like, in 1996-97, Doom was becoming more passé. People wanted more realistic environments, and that people wanted more from games. They wanted more of a story, and so Eternal Doom really delivers on all of that in a much more sort of like maximalist package. Oh, this is okay. So it's hard to see that switch to begin with, but you also have to run over that platform while it's coming up, otherwise it'll go down. That's an example of like cryptic Eternal Doom progression. Earlier on, when I had to raise the bridge, there's also a very, very small area where the switch was at, and it's very, very easy to miss. The author claims that was just the only available surface to put it on. I don't fully believe that, because I still feel like you could have made it slightly wider or lit the area a little more. Maybe it would have taken down the realism, but whatever. Different values. This is one of the coolest rooms, and I really do like the textures used in this room. Like, all the marble textures are some of my favorite textures in Doom, and this is the most like trippy sort of area of the map. I'm sad it's kind of only one room. I wish he would have embraced a kind of like changing of setting or getting slightly more surreal, but generally the intent, I think, was to be more gothic or whatever, which I don't think is fully I think that the textures let it down a little bit. Like, the main texture that's used isn't good enough to fully carry that vibe, but the architecture is, you know, top notch, obviously. Like, the architecture in this room uses a lot with very little. Between the windows, that sort of altar, the lighting, the sort of cross beams, the stairway, like, there's a lot going on in this room. Even though it's very simple, it doesn't look visually bland at all. So yeah, I think that's like, and that's very, very hard to do, I imagine, when you're working with limits, where every little change that you might do might affect whether this map even runs at all. So you're always balancing, like, what details can I get in? What can I, you know, what sort of cheat can I get in? And I didn't even notice all these archways before because it's so subtle, but it does add to the overall feeling of the map. Also, just the fact that it's surrounded by a void, which again, 100% probably because of the limitations, but it does add an interesting atmosphere. So this was the last map of the original release of Eternal Doom, and and then when Eternal Doom 2 was released, when they sort of merged with TMT, this became the first map of the second episode. But Sverre Kvernmo didn't do anything for the rest of Eternal Doom, which is kind of sad. But this is kind of his like swan song from Doom mapping for a long time until more recently. But anyway, the reason I wanted to come back to Eternal Doom, also getting this key is kind of annoying. Like, the switch goes down there, but it'll go back up, and you can hit the switch again, but it's not necessarily clear that you can do that. But anyway, I do like how these areas connect up to each other really well, and I'll explain the yellow switches later. But the reason I wanted to come back to Eternal Doom more than anything else, and the reason I'm going to talk about two other Eternal Doom maps after this one, even though this is probably the most well-regarded one, is because there's a new game coming out called Doom Eternal, the sequel to Doom 2016. Of course, Doom 2016 is very highly regarded. generally. I think it was very smart of the team at id Software who made it to kind of stick with a kind of stupid game that is streamlined. But you can just see in this a much different conception of what Doom is that was trying to be sort of more lofty and maybe didn't fully get there, and in a lot of ways embodies this kind of weird 90s like pastiche aesthetics that don't fully like, you know, it doesn't really fully capture an experience, because there's some things that are really refined and some things that aren't. But it's a really important and significant set in the history of the Doom modding community, regardless of, you know, whether the fact that some people don't like it because it's too confusing, or, you know, it's been sort of maybe replaced in some ways in terms of detail and scope. But I think it's a really interesting thing, and this was something that had like the level of effort into it that was put into a commercial release. There's a story, there's like various phases, there's a lot of custom textures. It's almost like bordering on a TC in a lot of ways. And the entire setting is this entirely unique, different setting that's distinct from Doom. So it's something that is very ambitious in a lot of ways for Doom modding, you know, for modders. Partially because I'm sure that they, you know, were thinking like, maybe I can get a job out of this. And partially they're just trying to one-up each other, you know. But I just felt like the way that they decided to go with the name Doom Eternal for the sequel, it's an obvious reference to this, but most people aren't going to know that, because most people aren't going to know what Eternal Doom is. And I just feel frustrated about the idea of something like this being like semi-erased from history. I mean, of course it's not going to be fully erased because it's a relatively well-known WAD, but people don't know what the source is, and I feel like maybe because it's id Software, even though it's like none of the original people who worked on Doom, maybe like Kevin Cloud or somebody, Tim Willits maybe, who only sort of worked on Doom because he worked on episode 4. I just don't think it's very respectful to this team, and I think at least they should acknowledge that, you know, that it's inspired by that. And maybe I'm the only person who feels this way, because I've talked to other people who are like, well, it's whatever, like it's a acknowledgement and they don't expect more than that. But I don't really think it is an acknowledgement. It doesn't really make sense to me, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do with what Eternal Doom is. And the whole idea of it being Eternal Doom is this idea of, you know, it existing for, you know, it's sort of capturing something that goes beyond Doom, that will last like eternally. And, you know, in reality, it's very much a product of its time, much more so than, you know, the megawads that were made before this that are much more quaint, because there's, you know, because that simple sort of combat and setup, there's so many sets that are still like that. But on the other hand, there's some stuff that is done that is very unique and hasn't really been explored. And there's a level of design being explored that isn't really like common. It's very unusual, and I don't really think that's like fully captured by this sort of this game that is intentionally sort of dumb and action oriented, referencing something that had the intent of making something more intelligent and about puzzles, and there being some sort of larger story and being much more ambitious artistically. There's something about that, and just the general like disrespect of this history and how much it probably defines like the whole you know, Doom being resurrected and everything like that I really don't like. And I don't know, I just like, at the end of the day, I'm more interested in what a lot of these modding communities will make, even if like it's less polished, or even if it doesn't like reach the level of coherence or even the level of quality of, you know, a commercial release most of the time. There are still some cases where it does feel completely unique and out of time. And it's almost easier to play this now because it's within the setup of Doom. There's modern source ports or whatever than it is for me to play like Redneck Rampage or Psycho Circus: The Nightmare Child, like things that this author worked on later that were probably much more hip and current after this came out. So I don't know, like it just like I don't know. It strikes me as there's just something about that. So when I was recording this video previously, and I had a bunch of dropped frames, and I didn't have so many this time, but I managed to like one-shot that cacodemon with one rocket, but I'm out of rockets here, so I just am like slowly shooting it. But I managed to get it from like really far away with one rocket, and it was like so satisfying. But you're just gonna have to settle for me watching me chain gun it, and then dodge the very far away fireballs. I think it is always really funny when the map goes back that far and you can kill those like cacodemons. I had a death exit from this map, and again I lost that because so many drop frames and stuff. But this area is actually really interesting. Apparently it was supposed to be expanded on, and the author was disappointed in it, so he just retextured it. However, I really like the retexture. It actually makes me think of Thief the Dark Project, and how there are certain like castle areas that will go, especially the map The Sword, which is one of the best maps in really any video game in my opinion, and how it goes from like this castle setting to something more organic. And I know that they didn't really change the architecture, but even just the green texture, I'm sad that it didn't go fully into that texture change. It just goes back to that. But apparently he just did that because he ran out of things to do with it. Like this is apparently one of the last areas that was worked on. But I actually think it's like one of the most interesting parts of the map to think about, like how, in a very subtle way, like this map suddenly changed theme, and I think that's really interesting, and it makes me think of like, I wonder if the Thief designers might have even played Eternal Doom, because it came out originally in '96, and the full release was in '97, and Thief came out in 1998, like at the end of the year. So it's very possible that especially these Doom maps from the '90s, that other level designers who were working in the industry might have been playing these, especially something like Eternal Doom, which was looked at as being very sort of, a cut above, and borderline like something that could have been a commercial release if it wasn't too late, to do that at that point. So, I don't know, yeah. We're coming up on the central part of this map, so it's sort of been building up to it gradually, but you've seen all these yellow switches at various points during the map, and now there's a central part that you come up on at the end that is like sort of an altar area, and basically your whole object is to get the yellow key so that you can exit out of an area through a doorway that I just passed a few minutes ago. I'll go back to it. But when I first played through this map, I didn't realize that you could activate those switches. I thought you had to have the yellow key because it's inconsistent, like conveyances in the Doom engine. Like, in Doom games, like usually if you see a switch, that means that you have to have that key to use it. But in this case, you just activate these yellow things, and that will make sure that you can use it. And you can use those switches that are scattered throughout the level. There are 8 switches that are yellow switches scattered throughout the level that become active once I hit those things. Or at least once I come into this room. I'm not sure. They might become active right now, right after I hit that switch. But I didn't fully know that, so it's something that really frustrated me, because then you have to go all the way back through the map and find those switches. Of course, I guess I didn't even realize that there are sort of tags things you can use. You can place like markers on the auto map. So that's what you were expected to do in this, and maybe possibly like other sets, or other levels in this set rather. I like this area, by the way. I like the way that the stairs raise up. There's just a lot of cool details. But yeah, if I try and dive in there, I'll show you. I just go into the lava. So the object is to raise that lava with all those 8 switches so that you don't just die and get trapped here, which is what will happen if I just do that. So yeah, now I have to go all the way back through the level, which is quite frustrating. But yeah, you were supposed to place markers to find the things. So I played this map several times because I got quite confused when I first played through it, so I really needed to like basically rehearse. And then I made a previous recording, so I knew this level better by this point. I played through it several times, so it's easier for me to know where all the switches are. I'm looking for a secret right now that doesn't pop up until later, and I didn't realize that, so just ignore that. Yeah, I haven't had too many drop frames in this recording. That was like a concern because I raised the bit rate from my previous episode because I was worried, it got really compressed in one area, that it might be, I tried to make it a little bit better. But in any case, yeah, Eternal Doom. So honestly, somebody on the internet said that I liked this set a lot. Yeah, you see a bunch of drop frames right here. I apologize for that. Somebody on the internet said that I like this set a lot, which I think is slander, and I think that person should go to prison. No. I don't necessarily like this set a lot, but I do think it's very interesting, and there are a handful of maps that I really like. I almost think I might like map 4 Nucleus more than this by Sverre Kvernmo, but I think this is a more interesting and well-realized concept, and that's probably why it's one of the most well-regarded Doom maps into today, and one of the ones that people talk about in Eternal Doom. Or it's probably the one that is talked about in the most positive light. The other map that's talked about a lot is map 30, which is much more negatively talked about. But yeah, here now we're going to go through the rest of the map. I didn't go down this elevator before, so I'm going to do that. Or perhaps I did to get health, I can't remember. Oh yeah, I did. There's one that I didn't go down before. And so that's what I'm going to do, and it'll spawn in enemies as you do that. So, I mean, at least, like, I know you were expected to mark those. I didn't even know about that feature on the auto map. But at least there's, like, some challenge as you do that. I personally think that there are better ways that you could convey that, even in the central area. Like, there could be a teleporter that sends you back to the beginning of the map, so you don't have to backtrack all the way back, because I will have to run all the way back to the beginning of the map. And I like the idea that, like, the least it could do is teleport me to the beginning of the map so I can start the search there and then come back to the end. You see these cyber demons are still wandering around. I don't really have it in me to kill them because I pistol started. I'll get a VFG later, but I just don't like killing them if I don't need to. There is one area that they become a huge fucking hassle, though. Yeah, so we're going back into the central area. You see some Mancubi have spawned. I'm playing this on Ultraviolence, and it's funny, like, having played this map a few times, there are some spawns and things that happen differently. But any excuse to run back through this main courtyard is good, because it's the most interesting part of the entire map. And, they have to add, like, a lot of custom textures in order to do this complex lighting effects. And there was limited amount of, not custom, sectors, a bunch of sectors. This is kind of a nasty teleport ambush. There were a few that I skipped over that were pretty nasty, too, that I didn't mention. The one coming up into that green area, like right before the central area. And then there was one, this is a pretty nasty ambush here. And then there was one, I'm trying to think of what was the other. Oh, when you fall down into the pit, that's a pretty nasty ambush, like with the Berserk pack, and where I ended up picking up the blue key. I'm sorry, there's just so much to talk about in terms of this overall set. And I'm sure there will continue to be. I'm probably going to do 2 more videos. I'm trying to, like, use my Berserk pack as much as possible, because I'm pistol starting, and, like, ammo is sometimes ammo was at like a premium for me when I was like getting into the map, but at this point it's not as much of a big deal. I can probably just use plasma or whatever, especially because I don't intend to kill the cyber demon. But in any case, the cyber demon is really annoying because it will run back to the beginning of the map and I sort of have to run past him. I guess you're expected to kill him. It's actually impossible to get 100% kills in this map because there's a Baron that's accidentally placed in a wall somewhere, which is sad because you think about something that someone spent a whole year on. There's still bugs like that. This is the area of the ambush that I was talking about that's kind of nasty. But because it does connect up, it's easier for me to go back and get that switch. But admittedly, it's because I know this map pretty well at this point. The fact that there's like these multiple tiers of ambush and that some areas will open up is it kind of makes it worthwhile though. Like I get to pick up the Megasphere there, which I'll pick up in a second. So a lot of the other maps in Eternal Doom, my issues with them, there's some maps that people don't like the switch hunts. A lot of the most switch hunt. Oh, this ambush is fucking awful on Ultraviolence. You're ambushed on two sides by a Hell Knight and in this like narrow hallway. So you can die very, very quickly if you don't know that that's happening. The worst the worst parts that aren't necessarily the confusing maps, although there's some like Jim Flynn, like I really like his ideas. But I didn't like his maps in execution as much as I thought. And then Bob Evans made map 20, which I'll talk about later, but also map 30, which is by far the most confusing and just totally bullshit like map in Eternal Doom in terms of switch hunts or whatever. And it's just like they could have chilled out a little bit on needing to do that, I feel like, and reduce the map size. But everyone has to prove that their dick is bigger than someone else's. So, and I feel like that was very much driving map design. And it probably still does, maybe not as much of an extent, but I mean, I do think that explains a lot about modding communities and the Doom modding community in general, is people trying to one-up each other in that way. But yeah, here I'm gonna avoid Cyber Demon, and that's gonna become a slight problem in a second. Guys are gonna respawn. As you see, I have to go back all the way to the beginning. Those torches are the things that I was talking about. As far as they were just added to prevent visplane overflow, and that switch right there that I'm looking at is also apparently just put there because there was no other available surface. I don't buy it. You could put it even on that column there, but anyway, that switch is hard to locate when you first play the map. I got very confused just entering the cathedral before you get into all of this. But this map certainly is an adventure, and it's very self-contained, much more so than most maps that I can really think of. And it does feel like it really kind of it opens the book and closes the book on its, like it's a full story. It's through design in a really effective way. But a lot of the other maps in Eternal Doom, some of them, are very confusing switch-wise, like the Jim Flynn maps or the Bob Evans maps. Although I really do like map 20. But a lot of them just kind of feel like big castle things that blend together. Like a lot of the maps by Christopher Couleur, I guess is the name of the author, and some other authors just really intensely blend together for me. And I've never liked the textures. I don't like the recoloring or the custom sounds. There's just some things. And the midis, the music is not very good in general for this set, I don't think, compared to the midis that are used in a lot of modern sets, or even Memento Mori, because Mark Clem is a quite a good composer. And I don't know, there's just it doesn't fully I am amazed that I managed to get by that Cyber Demon without even getting hit. at all, and having to reload, because I had to, my first playthrough I had to do it like a bunch. So yeah, I finally pick up the Megasphere. So we're getting to the end area now. I think I've hit all the switches. So now I'm going to go back into that room and activate them all so I can get that yellow key. And, you know, because I know the map, I can run through it, but it really wouldn't hurt to put a teleporter to this area. Like, as much as I like this flame area here, there's a lot of cool stuff. I like the green area here. I really like it, actually, even though apparently it was a compromise and the author didn't like it. And here's where I can finally get that BFG secret. That is a cool switch texture, but it's hard to see in this level in a lot of the places where it's used. So I can get the fourth secret. Not too many secrets in this level, but in Eternal Doom in general, it's kind of arbitrary what is marked a secret and what isn't. You'll see that especially, like, if I play through map 20 next, which I'm probably going to do. But yeah, a lot of these castle maps just blend together, and that's why. And I really, I think I discovered Eternal Doom because it was one of the, you know, sets that was mentioned a lot. And played through a few maps and just didn't like it. I didn't like the custom textures. I was very much, you know, a loyalist for the original game, and finally decided like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, to play through Eternal Doom, and I got most of the way through it. I think I stopped at like one of the Jim Flynn maps because I got lost and I couldn't figure out how to get through without like clipping through the map. So I played through most of the maps, and I think it gave me a good sense of like, this is a very interesting set, but it is also very dated, and there's not really one, or, you know, I can't dismiss this set really, and I won't effusively praise it either. There are some people who think it's really cool and like it's their example of what they want. There are some people who think it's awful and it's like the example of what they hate. I guess you can find me somewhere in between. Like, I'm a Eternal Doom centrist. I'm kind of like, I do like some elements in some specific maps a lot, like this map or the next one that I'm talking about, which is map 20. But then other times it just blends together and feels very much like a product of the 90s. This is kind of an interesting last area where the Cyber Demon is teleported around. I'm not even sure what activating the switches do, but this hallway, it hurts you, which is awful. But you stand in, you teleport, these like things teleport you, and you have to look around. So it's something you might miss if you keep running through that teleporter. You have to look around to access that switch and then come back, and a spider mastermind will spawn in. This is where I death exited earlier, but yeah, that's the exit of the map. And it was the end of the original release of Eternal Doom. The maps after it are kind of weird and gimmicky, like the ones immediately after, but it also begins this episode in subsequent releases. So anyway, I'll talk more about Eternal Doom, a very interesting, if flawed and dated set in a lot of ways, but with a few maps that I think are really, really cool. Yeah, enjoy this bit of music, and yeah, I'll come back with another episode at some point. So yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will catch you on the flip side.